Heavy breaths. Trembling hands. Ethan and Lisa stood frozen as glowing eyes emerged from the darkness, not one, not two, but many. The creatures weren't attacking. They were waiting. A deep, unnatural chuckle echoed through the trees. This wasn't a hunt. It was something far worse. The Michigan wilderness stretched for miles, a vast, unbroken expanse of towering trees and shifting fog. The air was thick with the damp scent of decaying wood, and the silence was almost unnatural, so heavy it pressed against the skin like an unseen force. For outsiders, this was just another stretch of American forest. But for those who lived near it, this place was something else entirely. A place where people vanished. A place where something was watching. Ethan Carter never believed in ghost stories. A seasoned investigative journalist, he had built his career on exposing hoaxes and unraveling so-called mysteries. The DOGMAN legend was just another case to him, an urban myth kept alive by fear and paranoia. But there were too many missing people. Too many reports of strange tracks, distorted screams in the dead of night, and hikers who returned with stories of something stalking them from the shadows. Whatever the truth was, Ethan had to find it. Lisa Moore, on the other hand, believed only in science. A wildlife biologist with years of fieldwork, she dismissed the stories outright. Bears, coyotes, and territorial wolves, every piece of the so-called legend had a logical explanation. Still, something about this forest unsettled her. The way the trees bent unnaturally in places, the eerie absence of animal sounds, the overwhelming feeling of being watched. She had spent her life in the wild, but here, she felt like an intruder. Derek McCoy didn't need explanations. He had seen enough. A seasoned hunter, he knew these woods better than most, and he had spent years hearing the whispers of locals, tales of a creature that walked like a man but hunted like a beast. He had seen the tracks himself. Larger than any wolf, disappearing abruptly as if their owner had simply lifted off the ground. He had felt the heavy gaze from beyond the trees, that primal certainty that something unseen was watching. Unlike Ethan and Lisa, Derek wasn't here to find the truth. He was here to survive it. And somewhere in the depths of that endless forest, hidden between the twisted branches and the creeping fog, the DOGMAN was already watching them. Silent. Calculating. Waiting. The trees loomed taller as they ventured deeper into the forest, their thick canopies blocking out what little daylight remained. The air grew colder, heavier, filled with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. Every step felt like a descent into something ancient, something untouched by time. The deeper they went, the more the world outside seemed to fade away. Ethan led the way, camera in hand, recording everything. He spoke in a low voice, narrating their progress like a documentary. The locals claim this area is cursed. That something lurks here, something not meant to be seen. But today, we're going to separate fact from fiction. His words were confident, but his grip on the camera tightened with every whisper of wind through the branches. Lisa followed closely, eyes scanning the ground for signs of movement. She pointed out tracks, not quite human, not quite animal. Whatever left these prints wasn't walking on four legs, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The logical part of her brain tried to explain it away, but the unease crawling up her spine refused to be ignored. Derek, the only one armed, kept to the rear, moving with the practiced quiet of a hunter. He had been in forests like this before. He knew when a place was just a place, and when it was something else. Right now, this was something else. His grip tightened on his rifle. Then, a sound. Not an animal. Not the wind. Something slow, deliberate. A branch snapped somewhere beyond the trees. They froze. Something was out there. And it was getting closer. The snap of the branch echoed through the trees, sharp and deliberate. Not an accident. Not the wind. Something, or someone, was out there, moving just beyond their sight. The three of them stood frozen, listening, their breath shallow against the heavy silence that followed. Ethan turned slowly, camera raised, trying to capture whatever was lurking in the dense undergrowth. but the fog was thick, shifting in unnatural patterns, swallowing the light from his lens. "Derek," he whispered, "tell me that was just a deer." Derek didn't answer. His stance was rigid, eyes locked on the darkness between the trees. He had spent enough time in the wilderness to know when an animal was near. This wasn't an animal. Animals ran when they sensed humans. This thing wasn't running. It was watching. Lisa swallowed hard, her pulse drumming in her ears. She wanted to explain it away, but her instincts screamed otherwise. "We need to keep moving," she murmured, forcing herself to step forward. Standing still felt like inviting whatever was out there to come closer. Another sound, closer this time. A low, guttural breath. Not human, not quite animal. A shiver crawled up Ethan's spine. His camera was still rolling, but all it captured was the swirling mist. Then, just beyond the fog, two glowing eyes blinked open. Lisa gasped. Derek raised his rifle. Ethan's hands trembled. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. But they knew. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The silence that followed was suffocating. The glowing eyes had vanished, swallowed by the mist, but the presence remained. They weren't alone anymore. Derek kept his rifle raised, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. His breath was steady, but his fingers twitched near the trigger. "That thing," he muttered, voice low. "It's playing with us." Ethan swallowed hard, his camera still rolling, though his hands trembled slightly. "We need to go back," he said, but even as the words left his lips, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The way back felt different. The trees looked denser. The path behind them wasn't as clear as it had been just minutes ago. Lisa moved closer to the others, gripping the strap of her backpack like a lifeline. "We don't run," she whispered. "Predators chase what runs." Derek exhaled sharply. "That's assuming we're dealing with a predator that plays by the same rules as anything we've seen before." Then, a noise, low, guttural, impossibly deep. It came from behind them. Then another, this time, from their left. Two sounds. Two places. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. "There's more than one?" The mist swirled unnaturally, moving against the wind. Shadows stretched where they shouldn't. Branches snapped, but nothing was there. Lisa's breath hitched. "We're being herded." Derek gritted his teeth. "Then we don't play along." But as soon as he said it, something crashed through the trees. And this time, it wasn't hiding. It was coming straight for them. The sound of snapping branches and pounding footsteps shattered the silence. It was fast. Too fast. Whatever was coming for them was not just big, it was hunting with intent. Derek didn't wait. "Run," he barked, shoving Lisa forward as he spun around, rifle raised. But before he could fire, a blur of darkness lunged from the trees. A towering mass of fur and muscle, its glowing eyes locking onto him with terrifying intelligence. Ethan barely had time to process what he was seeing. The camera was still rolling, but his instincts screamed for him to move. He grabbed Lisa's wrist, pulling her through the trees as Derek fired a shot behind them. The gunshot roared through the night, but the thing didn't stop. Lisa stumbled over a root, gasping as Ethan pulled her up. "We can't outrun it," she cried. She was right. The heavy footsteps behind them didn't fade, they were getting closer. Derek reloaded on the run, his hunter's instincts kicking in. "Find high ground," he shouted. "It's harder for it to lunge up than down." Ethan's lungs burned, his mind racing. Ahead, a rocky ridge cut through the forest. It was steep, but climbable. "There! Go!" Lisa scrambled ahead, clawing her way up. Ethan followed, fingers digging into the damp stone. Derek turned, firing 2 more shots before throwing himself onto the ledge. For a moment, everything went still. Then, from below, a deep growl reverberated through the air. A shadow moved in the mist. The DOGMAN stood at the base of the ridge, watching them. studying them. It wasn't just hunting them. It was testing them. Perched on the rocky ridge, Ethan, Lisa, and Derek barely dared to breathe. Below them, the dogman stood motionless, its massive form partially obscured by the mist. The dim moonlight caught its features, muscles rippling beneath thick, dark fur, a hunched posture that suggested raw, explosive power, and those eyes, those glowing, intelligent eyes. It wasn't leaving. It was waiting. Lisa wiped sweat from her brow, her breath shallow. "It could have caught us already," she whispered. "It's watching." Ethan's mind raced. He had chased legends for years, but this was real. He fought the urge to lift his camera, but something told him that looking away from it, even for a second, was a mistake. Derek, gripping his rifle, muttered under his breath. "It knows we're cornered." The ridge was steep, the descent on the other side uncertain. Jumping down blind could mean broken bones. Staying meant facing whatever this thing had planned. Then, the creature did something none of them expected. It grinned. Not an animalistic snarl, not an instinctual baring of teeth. A grin, wide, deliberate, knowing. Lisa's stomach churned. "It's playing with us." Derek's jaw clenched. "Or it's waiting for something worse." A howl echoed through the trees. Not far. Not alone. Ethan's blood ran cold. There was more than one. The howl wasn't distant. It was close. Too close. A second pair of glowing eyes flickered in the darkness beyond the trees, then a third. They were surrounded. Lisa clenched her fists, her body trembling. "We can't stay here." Ethan's grip tightened on his camera, heart pounding. He had wanted proof, now he had it. But what good was evidence if they didn't make it out alive? Derek's hands were steady, but his voice was firm. "We go now. Fast and together." His gaze flicked to the opposite side of the ridge, where a narrow drop led into another stretch of forest. Dangerous, but not as dangerous as staying put. Lisa exhaled sharply. "We don't even know what's down there." Derek didn't look away from the beasts below. "It's not them." The dogman at the base of the ridge let out a deep, guttural chuckle, a sound that didn't belong in the throat of an animal. It knew what they were about to do. And it didn't care. Because it had already won. Ethan took the first leap, landing hard, rolling onto damp leaves. Lisa followed, stumbling but safe. Derek was last, hitting the ground with a controlled thud. For a brief moment, it seemed like they had outrun them. Then Ethan turned back. Atop the ridge, the dogmen stood tall, staring down, their eyes burning in the darkness. They hadn't chased. They hadn't lunged. They had let them go. Lisa clutched Ethan's arm, whispering in terror. "They're not hunting us." Ethan swallowed, realization dawning. "No. They wanted us to leave." Derek's face was grim. "Because whatever's deeper in these woods." He didn't finish the sentence. Because they already knew. They had just escaped the wrong thing.